Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the Secret Doctrine with Cyclic Evolution and Karma. It is the spiritual evolution of the inner, immortal man that forms the fundamental tenet in occult sciences. To realize, even distantly, such a process, the student has to believe, A, in the one universal life, independent of matter, or what science regards as matter, and B, in the individual intelligences that animate the various manifestations of this principle. No, you don't. In one way you do, and in another way you don't, right? I have my own theory of spiritual evolution. I have outlined it many times, but I don't necessarily believe that the first stage has the consciousness that we attribute to humanity, or even to a lesser degree the beings on the fourth dimensional plane or the ones on the sixth dimensional plane. Right? We're in the fifth, 5D space, and we have a greater understanding than the fourth dimension and the third dimension. So while it is entirely possible that there are insolation inside of the individualized atoms, it's not probable. And so you don't have to believe that. Right? Have to is a big word. Mr. Huxley does not believe in vital force. Others do. Mr. J.H. Hudson's and Sterling's work concerning protoplasm has made no small havoc in this dogmatic negation. Professor Beale's decision is also in favor of a vital principle, and Dr. B. W. Richardson's lectures on the nervous ether have been sufficiently quoted from. Thus, opinions are divided. The one life closely related to the one law, which governs the world of being, karma. Exoterically, this is simply and literally action, or rather, an effect-producing cause. Esoterically, it is quite a different thing in its far-fetching moral effects. It is the unerring law of retribution. That is not a law. There is a law of response, but that is not retribution. There is a response to every action. It is not driven by malice, which would be retribution. To say to those ignorant of the real significance, and for further elucidation, the 8 laws of creation. To say to those ignorant of the real significance, characteristics, and awful importance of this eternal, immutable law, that no theological definition of a personal deity can give an idea of this impersonal, yet ever-present and active principle, is to speak in vain. Nor can it be called providence, for providence, with the theist, the Christian Protestants at any rate, rejoices in a personal male gender, while with the Roman Catholics it is a female potency. Divine providence tempers his blessings to secure their better effects, Wogan tells us. Indeed, he tempers them, which karma, a sexless principle, does not. And I do not anthropomorphize God, right? I believe that God here in the manifested plane is the Holy Spirit, right? The Holy Spirit is entirely God, but it is not the entirety of God. It is the piece of God which is here on the mortal plane. We don't know whether that is male or female, masculine or feminine, because all things contain both masculine and feminine traits. I contain them, you contain them. Everything has both masculine and feminine contained within it. And so to say God is a he, to me, it is the popular way of referring to it, but that doesn't make God a dude sitting on a chair in heaven waiting for you to mess up. Right? That's how a lot of people conceptualize it. Like, there's just this sky daddy sitting up there paying attention to every single thing you do so that he can throw you in hell if you cuss a couple times too many. Right? That's not how it works. The karma is the effect of your actions rebounded upon you. Sometimes that is immediate, sometimes it takes a little while, but it is going to happen regardless. It is not masculine nor feminine, it is indeed both. Throughout the first two parts, it was shown that, at the first flutter of renascent life, Svabhavat, the mutable radiance of the immutable darkness, unconscious in eternity, passes, at every new birth of cosmos, from an inactive state into one of intense activity, that it differentiates and then begins its work through that differentiation. This work is karma. The cycles are also subservient to the effects produced by this activity. The one cosmic atom becomes 7 atoms on the plane of matter, and each is transformed into a center of energy. That same atom becomes 7 rays on the plane of spirit, and these 7 creative forces of nature, radiating from the root essence, follow. One, the right, the other, the left pass, separate till the end of the kalpa, and yet are in close embrace. What unites them? Karma. All of that is speculation, right? The one cosmic atom becomes 7 atoms. That is definitely speculation, and you can have that. But there are more than 7 atoms, which Mrs. Blavatsky did not believe, right? The one atom, to me, is not an atom. It is the Holy Spirit, the all-encompassing that is, right? The Holy Spirit being every single atom that is in existence all at the same time. Everything in existence is making up the Holy Spirit, or is made out of the Holy Spirit, whichever direction you want to take that viewpoint. And I don't believe that karma is uniting. It is just simply an immutable force. It is a law. It is a response. The atoms emanated from the central point emanate in their turn new centers of energy, which, under the potential breath of Fohat, begin their work from within, without, and multiply other minor centers. These, in the course of evolution and involution, form in their turn the roots or developing causes of new effects, from worlds and man-bearing globes, down to the genera, species, and classes of all the 7 kingdoms. Footnote. Vide stanza, book 1. Now, once again, there are more than 7 like, if you are classifying the 7 kingdoms in accordance with what I call the theory of spiritual evolution, right, from the atom up to the angel, then okay, there are 7 kingdoms. If you are trying to say that it is a division of 7 kingdoms that divide the individual animals into different species, then you are incorrect, right? Of which we only know 4. Now, what is the explanation here, right? We still have not gotten a good explanation of the 7 kingdoms. We haven't, we kind of got a little bit of an explanation about these 7 root races, of which we are the 5th, according to this, right? Now, I believe that we're in the 5th plane of existence, and so that does indeed align somewhat with that. But these 7 kingdoms, define them for me. Give me what they are. That footnote right here that said the classes of 7 kingdoms should have been the explanation here. We shouldn't have to go to book 1 and stanza 6. Yeah, the 6th, right? We shouldn't have to go back to that for this. I know we've already covered that, but it wasn't covered then. There was no good explanation of these 7. Now, I believe that the 7 are, here's the order, right? Starting at the bottom. The individualized atom, mere existence. The plane of growth, which is the 2nd plane of existence. That is going to be the plants. They grow up, but they can't move on of their own volition. The 3rd plane of existence is going to be the simple animals. These are the ones that you can't train to do anything. They operate simply off of instinct. The 4th plane of existence are going to be the animals that you can train. The 5th plane of existence is going to be us. We have the knowledge of time and the ability to use it. The sixth plane of existence is the disincorporated spirits and the elementals as described in these books. They have a better understanding of time, but not really an understanding of what that means. Whereas the seventh plane of existence is going to be the angels, the jinn, the demons, aliens, however you want to look at it, all the exact same thing. And that has the mastery of time, right? They can see forward and backwards in time, and they know what to do with that, right? They have the understanding of it. That is my seven. It's really easy to put out there. But if you're talking about, well, animals or birds, fish, beasts, it's going to be really hard to make that a seven division. For the blessed workers have received the Thyan Kam in the eternity, book of the aphorisms of Tsongkhapa. Thyan Kam is the power or knowledge of guiding the impulses of cosmic energy in the right direction. That is one of those things that I am working on, helping people to learn how to do. Right? I've written a book. It's in rough draft stage. I am working on the edits. One of the things that I do in there is trying to show people how to guide these impulses of cosmic energy in the right direction. You can literally manipulate the Holy Spirit. That's going to piss somebody off, but I don't care. The true Buddhist, recognizing no personal God nor any father and creator of heaven and earth, still believes in an absolute consciousness, Adi-Buddhi, and the Buddhist philosopher knows that there are planetary spirits, the Dayan Kohans. And that's the part where I split off, right? I do believe that there are elementals, but I don't believe that they're in charge of making sure that the earth turns in the right direction. They're not out there some giant being just holding the moon in place so that the face always faces towards the earth, right? I don't believe that that is the thing. There may be entities on the moon. There may be entities we don't see here on the elemental plane, salamanders and sylphs and nymphs and things like that. But that is not something I can prove, and anything along those lines is going to be speculation unless it is provable. But though he admits of spiritual lives, yet, as they are temporary in eternity, even they, according to his philosophy, are the Maya of the day, the illusion of a Dea Brahma, a short manvantara of 4,320,000 or 4,320,000,000 years. The yin sin is not for the speculations of men, for Lord Buddha has strongly prohibited all such inquiry. Well, that lets you know right there that there is something wrong with the doctrine. If you are being told not to question, then they're trying to control you. And you should be able to question, and if it is true, the answer to the question will be in the affirmative. Now, the yin sin is not for the speculations of men. That is the amount of time I am assuming from this. Like, I don't know if we said the yin sin before. I don't remember if we did. But according to context here, it is the illusion that we are alive. It is not an illusion. You are alive. This is a very real reality. You are manifested here by the direct will of God, voluntarily. It is not a prison planet. You are not being punished to be here. And these numbers, completely irrelevant. Right? This 4,320,000,000 years could have some significance, but probably not. Right? You can break it down into the cycle of the ages and then multiply that by whatever number you want and come up with some wild-ass random number. But again, it is going to be very firmly in the realm of speculation. If the Dayan Kohans and all the invisible beings, the seven centers and their direct emanations, the minor centers of energy, are the direct reflex of the one light, yet men are far removed from these, since the whole of the visible cosmos consists of self-produced beings, the creatures of karma, thus regarding a personal God as only a gigantic shadow thrown upon the void of space by the imagination of ignorant men. Footnote 2. Buddhist Catechism. They teach that only two things are objectively eternal, namely akasa and nirvana, and that these are one in reality, but a maya when divided. Buddhists deny creation and cannot conceive of a creator. Everything has come out of akasa, or sabhavat, on our earth, in obedience to a law of motion inherent in it. After a certain existence passes away, nothing ever came out of nothing. You can believe that, right? I do, right? I believe that there was something before God created everything. Now, that is almost anthropomorphizing, right? But I don't add that God has to be human. I don't add that it has to be a male. I don't add that it has to be a female. I believe that there is a supreme intelligent being, and that even that is kind of stretching what I say, outside of this reality. And this reality is created entirely from that being. And so it is inseparable, true. That part is pre-existent, right? It is the before becoming. Now, if you haven't been following along, I am doing another series along with this one, and that one is George Hegel's The Science of Logic. And one of the things that he was talking about is being, and there is not being, and then there is being, but there is no real middle ground in between the two. There is no process of becoming. You go from nothing into something. There has to be something existent for something to come from it. But before it is manifested, it is only potential. It is as though if you were to put a stasis spell, right? If you were to put to sleep all of time, everything in existence was to stop. That would be what we were before. What we are now is all of that in motion. And by the motion, it becomes the more. I don't know that that was clear. Hopefully I didn't bring too much confusion, but I don't know of a better way to explain that here. So, if a Vedantic Brahmin of the Advaita sect, when asked whether he believes in the existence of God, is always likely to answer, as Jacoliot was answered, I am myself God. A Buddhist, a Sinhalese especially, would simply laugh and say in reply, there is no God, no creation. Yet the root philosophy of both Advaita and Buddhist scholars is identical, and both have the same respect for animal life, for both believe that every creature on earth, however small and humble, is an immortal portion of the immortal matter. For matter with them has quite another significance than it has with either Christian or materialist, and that every creature is subject to karma. Now, I'm going to put in here that you are from God. You are a tiny, infinitesimally tiny, small sliver of the divine, but you are not the divine, right? The divine cannot manifest fully within itself, so you are not the divine. You are here as a individualized piece of the divine that I call the soul. You reside inside the temple of God, and all of that is made from the Holy Spirit. But the main point being is that you are not a God. Right? That is so vitally fucking important. The answer of the Brahmin is one which would suggest itself to every ancient philosopher, Kabbalist, and Gnostic of the early days. It contains the very spirit of the Delphic and Kabbalistic commandments, for esoteric philosophy solved, ages ago, the problem of what man was, is, and will be, of man's origin, life cycle, interminable in its duration of successive incarnations or rebirths, and finally of his absorption into the source from which he started. You have indeed speculated upon that. I speculate upon that myself. You, however, assert it as fact, where I assert it as speculation. But it is not physical science that we can ever ask to read man for us, as the riddle of the past or that of the future, since no philosopher is able to tell us even what man is, and he is known both to physiology and psychology. In doubt whether man was a god or a beast, he is now connected with the latter and derived from an animal. No doubt that the care of analyzing and classifying the human being as a terrestrial animal may be left to science, which occultists of all men regard with veneration and respect. They recognize its ground and the wonderful work done by it, the progress achieved in physiology, and even, to a degree, in biology. But man's inner, spiritual, psychic, or even moral nature cannot be left to the tender mercies of an ingrained materialism, for not even the higher psychological philosophy of the West is able, in its present incompleteness and tendency towards the decided agnosticism, to do justice to the inner, especially to his higher capacities and perceptions, in those states of consciousness across the road to which such authorities as Mill draw a strong line, saying, "So far and no further shalt thou go." No occultist would deny that man, no less than the elephant and the microbe, the crocodile and the lizard, the blade of grass or the crystal, is, in his physical formation, the simple product of the evolutionary forces of nature through a numberless series of transformation. But he puts the case differently. It is not against zoological and anthropological discoveries based on the fossils of man and animal that every mystic and believer in the divine soul inwardly revolts, but only against the uncalled-for conclusions built on preconceived theories and made to fit in with certain prejudices. Pot, meat, kettle. Their premises may or may not always be true, and as some of these theories live but a short life, the deductions therefrom must ever be one-sided with materialistic evolutionists. Yet it is on the strength of such very ephemeral authority that most of the men of science frequently receive undue honors where they deserve them the least. Footnote. We refer to those who would regard the statement of an impertinence or irreverence against accepted science to Mr. James Hutchinson Sterling's work concerning protoplasm, which is a defense of a vital principle versus the molecularists, Huxley, Tyndall, Vogt, and Company, and request them to examine whether it is true or not to say that the scientific premises may not always be correct, but that they are accepted, nevertheless, to fill up a gap or a hole in some beloved materialistic hobby. Speaking of protoplasm and the organs of man, as viewed by Mr. Huxley, the author says, "Probably, then, in regard to any continuity in protoplasm of power, of form, or of substance, we have seen Lucanes enow." Nay, Mr. Huxley himself can be adduced in evidence on the same side. Not rarely do we find in his essay admissions of probability where it is certainty that is alone in place. He says, for example, it is more than probable that when the vegetable world is thoroughly explored, we shall find all plants in possession of the same powers. When a conclusion is decidedly announced, it is rather disappointing to be told, as here, that the premises are still to collect. Again, here is a passage in which he seems to cut his own basis from beneath his own feet. After telling us that all forms of protoplasm consist of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen in very complex union, he continues, to this complex combination, the nature of which has never been determined with exactness, the name of protein has been applied. This, plainly, is an identification on Mr. Huxley's own part of protoplasm and protein, and what is said of one being necessarily true of the other, it follows that he admits the nature of protoplasm never to have been determined with exactness, and that, even in his eyes, the list is still sub judice. This admission is strengthened by the words, too, if we use this term, protein, with such caution as may properly arise out of a comparative ignorance of the things for which it stands. Protein is real. Just in case you were wondering. This is the eminent Huxley, the king of physiology and biology, who is proven playing at blind man's bluff with premises and facts. What may not the smaller fry of science do after this? Yes, they may even come up with theories that later become true. How about that? To make the working of karma in the periodical renovations of the universe more evident and intelligible to the student when he arrives at the origin and evolution of man, he has now to examine with us the esoteric bearing of the karmic cycles upon universal ethics. The question is, do these mysterious divisions of time, called yugas and kalpas by the Hindus, and so very graphically, kuklos, cycle, ring or circle by the Greeks, have any bearing upon or any direct connection with human life? Even exoteric philosophy explains that these perpetual cycles of time are ever returning on themselves periodically and intelligently in space and eternity. There are cycles of matter. Footnote. The cycles of matter, a name given by Professor Winchell to an essay of his written in 1860. And there are cycles of spiritual evolution, racial, national, and individual cycles. May not esoteric speculation allow us a still deeper insight into the workings of these? This idea is beautifully expressed in a very clever scientific work. The possibility of rising to a comprehension of a system of coordination so far outreaching in time and space all reach of human observation. It is a circumstance which signalizes the power of man to transcend the limitations of changing and inconsistent matter, and assert his superiority over all unstable and perishable forms of being. There is a method in the succession of events and in the relation of coexistent things, which the mind of man seizes hold of, and by means of this as a clue, he runs back or forward over eons of material history of which human experience can never testify. Events germinate and unfold. They have a past which is connected with their present, and we feel a well-justified confidence that a future is appointed which will be similarly connected with the present and the past. This continuity and unity of history repeat themselves before our eyes in all conceivable stages of progress. The phenomena furnishes us the grounds for the generalization of two laws, which are truly principles of scientific divination, by which alone the human mind penetrates the sealed records of the past and the unopened pages of the future. The first of these is the law of evolution, or, to phrase it for our purpose, the law of correlated successiveness, or organized history in the individual, illustrated in the changing phases of every single maturing system of results. These thoughts summon into our immediate presence the measureless past and the measureless future of material history. They seem almost to open vistas through infinity, and to endow the human intellect with an existence and a vision exempt from the limitations of time and space and finite causation, and lift it up towards a sublime apprehension of the supreme intelligence whose dwelling place is eternity. World Life, page 535 and 548. According to the teachings, Maya, or the elusive appearance of the marshalling of events and actions on this earth, changes, varying with nations and places. But the chief features in one's life are always in accordance with the constellation one is born under, or, we should say, with the characteristics of its animating principle, or the deity that presides over it. Whether we call it a dying Kohan, as in Asia, or an archangel, as with the Greek and Latin churches. In ancient symbolism, it was always the sun, though the spiritual, not visible sun was meant, that was supposed to send forth the chief saviors and avatars. Hence, the connecting link between the Buddhas, the avatars, and so many other incarnations of the highest seven. The closer the approach to one's prototype in heaven, the better the mortal whose personality was chosen by his own personal deity, the seventh principle, as its terrestrial abode. I disagree heartily with most of this, right? I don't believe that these entities are out there holding the moon or the planets in their orbit. I don't believe that at all. I believe that there are entities. I do. I believe that they exist and they do things that we don't necessarily understand. But I don't believe that every time I strike this lighter and create this plasma, that there is some creature in there that's going like spitting fire out of its mouth or summoning it from its fingers, which is what they believe. That is definitely what is believed by this, right? I don't believe that you have a personal God. I don't. I believe that it is the same God for everyone. God created everyone in the way that they are, for purpose and reason. I don't believe the intimation here is that you're born under this astrological sign, and that makes you something, right? If you're a Gemini, you're two-faced. If you're a Leo, you're an asshole, right? No, I don't believe that at all. I believe that you're an asshole independent of where the stars were when you were born. That is a thing. And so there are many things in here that I disagree with, these all being part of it, right? Now, the sun being the emanation point of life, that I agree with, but it doesn't have to be a spiritual sun. It can be the literal sun for many reasons. It has emanating power from a different place. I believe that it is a conduit, not a source. But there are a lot of things in here that I don't necessarily coincide with. Not the least of which is this highest 7, right? That the number is 8, not 7, for a variety of reasons. But saying that there are these 7 is making an assumption, right? It is taking for fact something that is speculative. All right, back to the text. 4. With every effort of will towards purification and unity with that self-God, one of the lower rays breaks, and the spiritual entity of man is drawn higher, and even higher to the ray that supersedes the first, until, from ray to ray, the inner man is drawn into the one and highest beam of the parent sun. Thus, the events of humanity do run coordinately with the number forms, since the single units of that humanity proceed one and all from the same source, the central and its shadow, the visible sun. For the equinoxes and solstices, the periods and various phases of the solar course, astronomically and numerically expressed, are only the concrete symbols of the externally living verity, though they do seem abstract ideas to uninitiated mortals. And this explains the extraordinary numerical coincidences with geometrical relations, as shown by several authors. Yes, our destiny is written in the stars. No, only the closer the union between the mortal reflection man and his celestial prototype, the less dangerous the external conditions and subsequent reincarnations, which neither Buddhas nor Christs can escape. This is not superstition. Least of all is it fatalism. The latter implies a blind course of some still blinder power, and man is a free agent during his stay on earth. He cannot escape his ruling destiny, but he has the choice of 2 paths that lead him in that direction, and he can reach the goal of misery, if such is decreed to him, either in the snowy white robes of the martyr, or in the soiled garments of a volunteer in the iniquitous course. For there are external and internal conditions which affect the determination of our will upon our actions, and it is in our power to follow either of the 2. Those who believe in karma have to believe in destiny, which, from birth to death, every man is weaving thread by thread around himself, as a spider does his cobweb. And this is one of those things that I don't necessarily agree with again, right? You are here as a willful incarnation. That is my speculation. I believe that there is the Trinity, right? There is the body, which is the temple. This is the thing which you navigate 5D space with. There is the spirit, which is everything all at once in existence, and motion, life, movement, heat. Those are the spirit. And then you have the soul, which is the individualized piece of God, which is you, the thing that makes the decisions for the 5D navigation device. You are placed here to learn lessons, right? Now, in my belief, what I believe is that before we were incarnated, the soul was existent. That means that before you were here, you were. When you were, before you were here, so were others. Right? Your mother, your father, your spouse, your children, all of them existed as a soul prior to incarnation. You got together with your parents and was like, I'm going to teach you these lessons of responsibility, these lessons of accountability, of how to raise somebody. And your parents said, I'm going to teach you discipline, and I'm going to teach you morality. I'm going to teach you all of these various lessons. And you sign a contract. Now, it's probably not a signature, but you agree to learn these lessons from these people. That is true for every single person that you have ever met in your life, even people that you meet in passing and never talk to. The guy that cut you off in traffic, there to teach you patience, right? You may choose to react with patience. God must want me to slow down. Or you can choose to react with anger. Oh, I'm going to get you. You cut me off. That is your choice. That guy is teaching you a lesson. The lesson is patience. Whether you accept the patience or not, your choice is to go with patience or anger or any other variation thereof. If you choose patience, you learn the lesson. If you choose anger, you didn't learn the lesson, and somebody else has to attempt to teach you the lesson of patience. Maybe in the same manner, maybe in a different manner, but the next time it will be more stark, right? They will cut you off a little bit closer. You will have to learn patience a little bit better. Maybe you're in person and you have to learn to restrain your anger face to face instead of in your car. It's a little bit tougher the next time you have to learn the lesson. All of these add up, right? There are lessons that you have to learn. You will learn grief unless you die before everybody else in your life. You will learn to grieve a spouse, a parent, a child, a friend, something. Somewhere along the way, you will learn grief. Now, you can either learn from grief and grow, or you can learn from grief and wither. That is your choice in the lesson of grief. But that is a pretty firm one. Everybody's going to learn that one. There's no real way to work your way around that one. There are other lessons, like I may have made an agreement. If I haven't learned this lesson by the time I meet you, you're to teach me this lesson. But if I have learned it prior to, then when you do whatever it is, it's not going to affect me in the same way. I have learned the lesson. The lesson repeats unless you learn it. And then it still gets a test, right? You've learned patience. You get the chance to practice patience. And so karma is the reactive agent in that, right? Once you have decided I'm going to choose anger, karma steps in and is like, okay, you didn't learn this lesson. Here's what the repeat of the pattern is going to be. It's going to be a little bit more intense. Right? That is the actions of karma. It's not necessarily destiny. You are destined to learn grief. You are not destined in what you will learn from grief. That is your choice. That is free will in action. The destiny is that the lesson must appear. What you pull from the lesson is your inactions, right? It is what you have chosen to be your actions. And so karma works off of that. Your intention goes into that. Right? The law of response goes roughly something like this. Action multiplied by, it's action multiplied by intention multiplied by repeat of the pattern. So your action times what you should be learning and whether you learn it or not. And if you don't, then the next factor is going to be a higher factor for the third element. So what you do multiplied by your intentions multiplied by how many times you have had this pattern repeat. And so it gets more intense as it goes forward until it gets to the point of diminishing returns, which is definitely a thing, at which point you're not really trying to learn the lesson of patience anymore. right? Once you have reached the point where it's like, okay, you're just not going to learn this, then it goes downhill. Then you are constantly in a state of anger. You never learn the lessons of patience. You can break that spin, but it gets a whole lot harder to do. Right? So the best thing to do is to learn it fairly quickly. If you don't learn it, then, right, if I go and I'm like, I'm going to learn the lesson of, what's a good one? Charity, right? I'm going to learn the lesson of charity. And then you go through your entire life and you're never doing charity. You're never giving anything away. You're a hoarder. You're taking in everything that you can and holding on to it as tight as you can just for simply having it. And then you die and you get to heaven and you're like, oh, man, I really messed that one up, didn't I? I didn't even get that a little bit. I guess I got to go back and try it again. And so that's how it happens. It is, again, a voluntary existence. Hopefully that was a little bit clear. As a spider does in its cobweb, and this destiny is guided either by the heavenly voice of the invisible prototype outside of us, or more by our intimate astral or inner man, who is, but too often, the evil genius of the embodied entity called man. Both of these lead on the outward man, but one of them must prevail. And from the very beginning of the invisible affray, the stern and implacable law of compensation steps in and takes its course, faithfully following the fluctuations. And again, that is not one of the laws. When the last strand is woven and man is seemingly enwrapped in his network of his own doing, then he finds himself completely under the empire of this self-made destiny. It then either fixes him like the inert shell against the immovable rock, or carries him away like a feather in a whirlwind, raised by his own actions, and this is karma. A materialist, treating upon the periodical creations of our globe, has expressed it in one sentence: the whole past of the earth is nothing but an unfolded present. This was Buckner, who little suspected that he was repeating an axiom of the occultist. It is quite true, also, as Burmeister, quoted in Force and Matter, remarks, that the historical investigation of the development of the earth has proved that now and then rest upon the same base, that the past has been developed in the same manner as the present rolls on, and that the forces which were in action ever remain the same. The forces, their noumena rather, are the same, of course. Therefore, the phenomenal forces must be the same also. But how can anyone feel so sure that the attributes of matter have not altered under the hand of protean evolution? How can any materialist assert with such confidence, as is done by Rossmessler, that this eternal conformity in the essence of the phenomena renders it certain that fire and water possessed at all times the same powers, and ever will possess them? Who are they that darken counsel with words without knowledge? And where were the Huxleys and Buckners when the foundation of the earth was laid by the great law? It is a fundamental principle of the occult philosophy, this same homogeneity of matter and immutability of natural laws, which are so much insisted upon by materialism. But that unity rests upon the inseparability of spirit from matter, and if the two are once divorced, the whole cosmos would fall back into chaos and non-being. Therefore, it is absolutely false, but an additional demonstration of the great conceit of our age, to assert, as men of science do, that all the great geological changes and terrible convulsions have been produced by ordinary and known physical forces. For these forces were but the tools and final means for the accomplishment of certain purposes, acting periodically and apparently mechanically, through an inward impulse mixed up with, but beyond, their material nature. There is a purpose in every important act of nature, whose acts are all cyclic and periodical. But spiritual forces, having been usually confused with the purely physical, the former are denied by, and therefore have to remain unknown to science because left unexamined. Footnote. Men of science will say, we deny because nothing of the kind has ever come within the scope of our experience. But, as argued by Charles Richet, the physiologist, so be it. But have you at least demonstrated the contrary? Do not, at any rate, deny a priori. Actual science is not sufficiently advanced to give you such right. The history of the world begins with its general aim, says Hegel, the realization of the idea of spirit only in implicit form, on Sikh, that is, as nature. A hidden, most profoundly hidden unconscious instinct in the whole process of history is directed to rendering this unconscious impulse a conscious one, thus appearing in the form of a merely natural existence, natural will, which has been called the subjective side, physical craving, instinct, passion, private interest, as also opinion and subjective conception, spontaneously present themselves at the very commencement. This vast congeries of volitions, interests, and activities constitutes the instruments and means of the world's spirit for attaining its object, bringing it to consciousness and realizing it. And this aim is none other than finding itself, coming to itself, and contemplating itself in concrete actuality. But that those manifestations of vitality on the part of individuals and peoples, in which they seek and satisfy their own purposes, are at the same time the means and instruments of a higher power, of a higher and broader purpose of which they know nothing, which they realize unconsciously, might be made a matter of question, rather has been questioned. On this point I announced my view at the very outset, and asserted our hypotheses, and our belief that reason governs the world, and has consequently governed its history. In relation to this independently universal and substantial existence, all else is subordinate, subservient to it, and the means for its development. Footnote. On World History in Philosophy of History, in Seabury's English translation. I am working through the works of Hegel, and I will be doing this work more than likely. But I have not yet, so I do not know the full context. So far, there is nothing even suggesting in the science of logic that he believes in a God. So, no metaphysician or theosophist could demur to these truths, which are all embodied in esoteric teachings. There is a predestination in the geological life of our globe, as in history past and future of races and nations. This is closely connected with what we call karma and Western pantheist nemesis and cycles. The law of evolution is now carrying us along the ascending arc of our cycle, when the effects will be once more re-emerged into and re-become the now neutralized causes, and all things affected by the former will have regained their original harmony. This will be the cycle of our special round, a moment in the duration of the great cycle, or Mahana Yuga. The fine philosophical remarks of Hegel are found to have their application in the teachings of occult science, which shows nature ever acting out with a given purpose, whose results are always dual. This was stated in our first occult volumes, in Isis Unveiled, in the following words. As our planet revolves once every year around the sun, and at the same time turns once in every 24 hours upon its axis, thus traversing minor circles within a larger one, so is the work of the smaller cyclic periods accomplished and recommenced within the great Saros. The revolution of the physical world, according to the ancient doctrine, is attended by a like revolution in the world of intellect, the spiritual evolution of the world proceeding in cycles, like the physical one. Thus, we see in history a regular alternation, and ebb and flow in the tide of human progress. The great kingdoms and empires of the world, after reaching the culmination of their greatness, descend again, in accordance with the same law by which they ascended, till, having reached the lowest point, humanity reasserts itself and mounts up once more, the height of its attainment being, by this law of ascending progression of cycles, somewhat higher than the point from which it had before descended. We have done the Isis Unveiled in its entirety. But these cycles, wheels within wheels, so comprehensively and ingeniously symbolized by the various Manus and Rishis in India, and by the Kabiri in the West, footnote 2, this symbolism does not prevent these now seemingly mythic personages from having ruled the earth once upon a time under the human form of actual living, though truly divine and godlike man. The opinion of Colonel Valency, also of Count de Gobelin, that the names of the Kabiri appear to be all allegorical, and to have signified no more than an almanac of the vicissitudes of the seasons, calculated for the operations of agriculture, is as absurd as his assertion that Aeon, Chronos, Saturn, and Dagon are all one, namely the patriarch Adam. The Kabiri were the instructors of mankind in agriculture, because they were the regents over the seasons and cosmic cycles. Hence it was they who regulated, as planetary spirits or angels, the mysteries of the art of agriculture. Yeah. Whatever. The Manus and Rishis of India, and by the Kabiri in the West, do not affect all mankind at one and the same time, as explained in the racial divisions of cycles. See subsection 6. Hence, as we see the difficulty of comprehending and discriminating between them with regard to their physical and spiritual effects, without having thoroughly mastered their relations with and actions upon the respective positions of nations and races, in their destiny and evolution. This system cannot be comprehended if the spiritual action of these periods, preordained, so to say, by karmic law, is separated from their physical course. The calculations of the best astrologers would fail, or at any rate remain imperfect, unless this dual action is thoroughly taken into consideration and dealt with upon these lines. And this mastery can be achieved only through initiation. I don't know about all that, boss. The grand cycle includes the progress of mankind from the appearance of primordial man of ethereal form. And by that I mean I am not initiated into any one of the clubs on the earth, right? I have had a spiritual initiation, so I guess in a way that's something, but that was a subjective thing. I believe that it happened. I cannot prove that it happened. It will remain in the realm of speculation, right? And so I don't believe that you have to be terrestrially initiated into the Masons or the Illuminati or any of those clubs in order to have progress. I find that a little bit ridiculous. The grand cycle includes the progress of mankind from the appearance of primordial man of ethereal form. It runs through the inner cycles of man's, progressive evolution from the ethereal down to the semi-ethereal and purely physical, down to the redemption of man from his coat of skin and matter, after which it continues running its course downward and then upward again, to meet at the culmination of a round, when the manvanteric serpent swallows its tail, and 7 minor cycles are passed. Again, that is some great speculation, but it is merely speculation. These are the great racial cycles which affect equally all the nations and tribes included in that special race. But there are minor and national as well as tribal cycles within those which run independently of each other. They are called in the Eastern esotericism the karmic cycles. In the West, since pagan wisdom has been repudiated as having grown from and developed by the dark powers, supposed to be at constant war and in opposition to the little tribal Jehovah, the full and awful significance of the Greek nemesis, or karma, has been entirely forgotten. Otherwise, Christians would have better realized the profound truth that Nemesis is without attributes, that while the dreaded goddess is absolute and immutable as a principle, it is we ourselves, nations and individuals, who propel her to action and gives the impulse to its direction. Karma Nemesis is the creator of nations and mortals, but once created, it is they who make of her either a fury or a rewarding angel. Yea, wise are they who worship Nemesis. Footnote, who dread Karma Nemesis would be better, as the chorus tells Prometheus. And as unwise they who believe that the goddess may be propitiated by whatever sacrifices and prayers, or have her wheel diverted from the path it has once taken. The triform fates and ever-mindful furies are her attributes only on earth, and begotten by ourselves. There is no return from the paths she cycles over, yet those paths are of our own making, for it is we, collectively or individually, who prepare them. Karma Nemesis is the synonym of providence minus design, goodness, and every other finite attribute and qualification, so unphilosophically attributed to the latter. An occultist or philosopher will not speak of the goodness or cruelty of providence, but identifying it with Karma Nemesis, he will teach that nevertheless it guards the good and watches over them in this, as in future lives, and that it punishes the evildoer, aye, even to his seventh rebirth. So long, in short, as the effect of his having thrown into perturbation even the smallest atom in the infinite world of harmony has not been finally readjusted. For the only decree of karma, an eternal and immutable decree, is absolute harmony in the world of matter as it is in the world of spirit. It is not, therefore, karma that rewards or punishes, but it is we who reward or punish ourselves, according to whether we work with, through, and along with nature, abiding by the laws on that which harmony depends, or break them. Nor would the ways of karma be inscrutable, were men to work in union and harmony, instead of disunion and strife. For our ignorance of those ways, which one portion of mankind calls the ways of providence, dark and intricate, while another sees in them the action of blind fatalism, and a third, simple chance, with neither gods nor devils to guide them, would surely disappear if we would but attribute all these to their correct cause. With right knowledge, or at any rate with confident conviction that our neighbors will do no more work to hurt us than we would think of harming them, the 2/3 of the world's evil would vanish into thin air. Were no man to hurt his brother, Karma Nemesis would have neither cause to work for, nor weapons to act through. It is the constant presence in our mind of every element of strife and opposition, and the division of races, nations, tribes, societies, and individuals into Cains and Abels, wolves and lambs, that is the chief cause of the ways of providence. We cut these numerous windings in our destinies daily with our own hands, while we imagine that we are pursuing a track on the royal high road of respectability and duty, and then complain of those ways being so intricate and so dark. We stand bewildered before the mystery of our own making and the riddles of life that we will not solve, and then accuse the great Sphinx of devouring us. But verily, there is not an accident in our lives, not a misshapen day or a misfortune, that could not be traced back to our own doings in this or in another life. If one breaks the laws of harmony, or, as the Theosophical writer expresses it, the laws of life, one must be prepared to fall into the chaos one has oneself produced. For, according to the same writer, the only conclusion one can come to is that these laws of life are their own avengers, and, consequently, that every avenging angel is only a typified representation of their reaction. We will definitely be linking the 8 laws of creation. Therefore, If anyone is helpless before these immutable laws, it is not ourselves, the artificers of our destinies, but rather those angels, the guardians of harmony. Karma nemesis is no more than the spiritual, dynamical effect that causes produced and forces awakened into activity by our own actions. It is a law of occult dynamics that a given amount of energy expended on the spiritual or astral plane is productive of far greater results than the same amount expended on the physical objective plane of existence. You can call it a law, but I'm not gonna buy into that one, right? The amount of energy expended on spiritual or astral plane is productive of far greater results than the same amount expended on the physical objective plane of existence is subjective. That is something that you are guessing at, right? I believe in the 8 laws. I do. But it is, again, something speculative. I believe that they work. I have done things that most people have not, right? I have healed myself. The fact that I am talking to you right now in this tone of voice is evidence that I have done that. I have healed myself in my shoulder. I've healed myself in my back. I've healed myself in my throat through the manipulation of these electromagnetic forces of creation, which is the Holy Spirit. I don't know that it is a multiplicative factor in the energy, right? Even having done the work, I don't know that it is. I don't know that it is even possible to do it without a correlating physical response. If you are not investing the energy, then nothing is happening. There may be a multiplicative effect, but how do you produce that variable? How do you say that it is more than? How do you define that? How do you come to that limitation? How do you say that, right? It is the law of occult dynamics that a given amount of energy expended is productive of far greater. That is a multiplicative effect. That is not cause reaction. That is not same or equal. That is multiplicative. Explain that. This state will last till man's spiritual intuitions are fully opened, which will not happen before we fairly kick off our thick coats of matter, until we begin acting from within, instead of following impulses from without, namely, those produced by our physical senses and gross, selfish body. That is attributing something to something that it does not necessarily have. Right now, the gross, we're not going to get into, right? The gross to them is the difference between the profane and the holy, right? The spiritual being holy and the material being gross, right? The body to the occultist of this particular venue is automatically wrong, that it is automatically not correct, that it is automatically a punishment. And I do not hold that at all. The body is the manifestation by which we are here. The corporeal plane is part of our reality. Now, you can maintain that this reality is an illusion, but I do not. We are here directly at the will of the Creator. He created. We are here. And so, it is not bad that we are here. Right? If God willed us to have a body, us having a body is not a bad thing. It cannot be. Period. The end. There is no gross selfishness to having a body. Now, you can exhibit grossness and selfishness while in the body, but it is not an inherent property of the body. You can be holy and selfless while still inside of the body. So it is not an inherent property of the body. And so, therefore, if you state that it is gross or selfish to have a body, you are incorrect. That's how logic works. I love it. Until then, the only palliative to the evils of life is union and harmony, a brotherhood in Act 2, and altruism, not simply in name. Again, this is not necessarily true, because you can overtake for the virtues. There are 7 vices. Most people are fairly familiar with them. There are 7 virtues that counteract the vices. The problem being is that it is a state of which there is no perfection, right? There is no perfect greed. There is no perfect charity. There is a sliding scale between those. Now, you can conceptualize a perfect greedy or a perfect selfless, but neither one of those are materially correct, right? You cannot be fully greedy for the entirety of your life, which would be the necessity for incorporating pure greed. But you are not meant to live a life either with all of the possessions or none of the possessions. You are meant to have some possessions. You're not meant to be attached to them to the point where it is more important to you than most other things. But you are meant to have things and to protect them, right? If it is your thing, nobody has a right to come take it from you. I don't care what you think that lesson might be, right? You are teaching someone else a lesson. You are meant to be in the middle of greed and charity. You are meant to be in the middle of lust and chastity. You are meant to be in the middle of diligence and sloth, right? You're supposed to take some time to rest. You're supposed to do active work. You're not supposed to always rest or always work. It is a balance. All 7 of the virtues and all 7 of the vices are balances. You are meant to balance all of them. They are all coins of each other. Love and wrath, greed and charity, lust and chastity. Balance, right? And so, unbalanced altruism is not positive. If you are giving away all things and you have no possessions, you are out of balance. You are not living life correctly. I don't care what book told you different. I don't care how long it has been written. If you are giving away all that you own and following me, you're doing it wrong. If you are swearing off sexual activities for the entirety of your life, you're doing it wrong. If you are giving away, if you are overtaking in the virtues, you are doing just as bad as if you were overtaking in the vices. And so, again, this simply cannot be true. Okay? The suppression of one single bad cause will suppress not one, but a variety of bad effects. And if a brotherhood, or even a number of brotherhoods, may not be able to prevent nations from occasionally cutting each other's throats, still, unity in thought and action, and philosophical research into the mysteries of being, will always prevent some, while trying to comprehend that which has hitherto remained to them a riddle, from creating additional causes in a world already so full of woe and evil. Knowledge of karma gives the conviction that if virtue in distress and vice in triumph make atheists of mankind. Footnote, Dryden. It is only because that mankind has ever shut its eyes to the great truth that man is himself his own savior as his own destroyer, that he need not accuse heaven and the gods, fates and providence, of the apparent injustice that reigns in the midst of humanity, but let him rather remember and repeat this bit of Grecian wisdom, which warns man to forbear accusing that which, just though mysterious, leads us on unerring, though through ways unmarked from guilt and punishment, which are now the ways and high road on which move onward the great European nations. The Western Aryans had, every nation and tribe, like their eastern brethren of the fifth race, their golden and their iron ages, their period of comparative irresponsibility, or the Satya age of purity, while now several of them have reached their iron age, the Kali Yuga, an age black with horrors. It is true, on the other hand, that the exoteric cycles of every nation have been correctly made to be derived from and depend on sidereal motions, The latter are inseparably blended with the destinies of nations and men. But in their purely physical sense, Europe knows of no other cycles than the astronomical, and makes its computations accordingly. Nor will it hear of any other than imaginary circles or circuits in the starry heavens that gird them, with centric and eccentric scribbled over, cycle and epicycle, orb in orb. But with the pagans, with whom, as Coleridge has it, time, cyclical time, was their abstraction of the deity, that deity manifesting coordinately with and only through karma, and being that karma nemesis itself, the cycles meant something more than a mere succession of events or a periodical space of time more or less prolonged duration, for they were generally marked with recurrences of a more varied and intellectual character than are exhibited in the periodical return of seasons or of certain constellations. Modern wisdom is satisfied with astronomical computations and prophecies based on unerring mathematical laws. Ancient wisdom added to the cold shell of astronomy the vivifying elements of its soul and spirit, astrology. And as the sidereal motions do regulate and determine other events on earth, besides potatoes and the periodical disease of that useful vegetable, a statement which, not being amenable to scientific explanation, is merely derided while accepted, those events have to be allowed to find themselves predetermined by even simple astronomical computations. Believers in astrology will understand our meaning. Skeptics will laugh at the belief and mock the idea. Thus, they shut their eyes, ostrich-like, to their own fate. Footnote. Not all, however, for there are men of science awakening to truth. This is what we read. Whatever way we turn our eyes, we encounter a mystery. All in nature for us is the unknown. They are numerous, those superficial minds for whom nothing can be produced by natural forces outside of facts observed long ago, consecrated in books and grouped more or less skillfully with the help of theories whose ephemeral duration ought, by this time, to have demonstrated their insufficiency. I do not pretend to contest the possibility of invisible beings, of a nature different from ours and susceptible of moving matter to action. Profound philosophers have admitted it all in all epochs as a consequence of the great law of continuity which rules the universe. That is not one of the laws of creation. That intellectual life, which we see starting in some way from non-being, neant, and gradually reaching man, can it stop abruptly at man to reappear only in the infinite, in the sovereign regulator of the world? This is little probable. Therefore, I no more deny the existence of spirits than I deny the soul while trying to explain certain facts without their hypotheses. The non-defined forces, historical and experimental researches, page 3. The above is written by A. de Rocas, a well-known man of science in France, his work being one of the signs of the times. This, because their little historical period, so-called, allows them no margin for comparison. Sidereal heaven is before them, and, though their spiritual vision is still unopened and atmospheric dust of terrestrial origin seals their sight and chains it to the limits of physical systems, still they do not fail to perceive the movements and note the behavior of meteors and comets. They record the periodical advents of those wanderers and flaming messengers, and prophesy, in consequence, earthquakes, meteoric showers, the apparition of certain stars, comets, etc., etc. Are they soothsayers for all that? No, they are learned astronomers. Why, then, should occultists and astrologers, as learned, be disbelieved when they prophesy the return of some cyclic event on the same mathematical principle? Why should they claim that they know it be ridiculed? Their forefathers and predecessors, having recorded the recurrence of such events in their time and day, throughout a period embracing hundreds of thousands of years, the conjunction of the same constellations must necessarily produce, if not quite the same, at any rate, similar effects? Are the prophecies derided because of the claim of the hundreds of thousands of years of observation and the millions of years of the human races? In its turn, modern science is laughed at for its far more modest geological and anthropological figures by those who hold to biblical chronology. Thus, karma adjusts even human laughter at the mutual expense of sects, learned societies, and individuals. Yet, in the prognostication of such future events, at any rate, all foretold on the authority of cyclic recurrences, there is no psychic phenomena involved. It is neither prevision nor prophecy, no more than is the signaling of a comet or star several years before its appearance. It is simply knowledge and mathematically correct computations which enable the wise men of the East to foretell, for instance, that England is on the eve of such or another catastrophe, France nearing such a point in her cycle, and Europe in general threatened with, or rather on the eve of, a cataclysm, which her own cycle of racial karma has led her to. The reliability of the information depends, of course, on the acceptation or rejection of the claim for a tremendous period of historical observation. Eastern initiates maintain that they have preserved records of the racial development and of events of universal import ever since the beginning of the fourth race, that which preceded being traditional. Moreover, those who believe in seership and occult powers will have no difficulty in crediting the general character, at least, of the information given, even if traditional, once the latter is checked and corrected by the corroboration of clairvoyance and esoteric knowledge. But in the present case, no such metaphysical belief is claimed as our chief dependence, but a proof is given on what, to every occultist, is quite scientific evidence. The records preserved through the zodiac for incalculable ages. It is now amply proved that even horoscopes and judiciary astrology are not quite based on a fiction, and that stars and constellations, consequently, have an occult and mysterious influence on and connection with individuals. And, if with the latter, why not with nations, races, and mankind in bulk? This, again, is a claim made on the authority of zodiacal records. We shall examine then, if you please, how far the zodiac was known to the ancients, and how far it is forgotten by the moderns. And that is going to bring us to the end of Cyclic Evolution and Karma. We will be dealing with the zodiac and its antiquity tomorrow, but for now, let's just say this. It is one thing to say there will be a war. It is quite another thing to say that there will be a war in 1912. Now, this was written in 1888, and indeed there were great societal changes going on in Europe, just as there had been for well over 100 years at a minimum. There has been war in Europe forever, right? As long as we have records, there is a record of a war going on somewheres. And so it is not a great leap of faith to say that, once again, there will be war. It is quite another thing to say that when the sun rises in Aquarius on June the 17th of 1912, the war will begin. And I don't remember what day the war began, so don't hit me on that. But it is quite another thing to be exact according to astrology, right? If you come and you say that on, today is March 10th of 2025. If you come and you say that on June 15th of 2025, there will be a bomb that will go off in this specific city, and that I am getting that from where this particular planet will be in the constellation, and then it happens exactly as you describe it, then we can talk about the accuracy of the zodiac. Do I believe that there is a possibility for some influence from the planets? Yes. That is indisputable, right? For the simple fact that every single time there is a full moon, the emergency rooms in every hospital across the country, probably even the world, I don't know the data on that, but in this country for sure, escalates, right? There is more occurrence of violence, both physical and even emotional and like along those nature, it gets more intense for those 3 days every single month. That is something that is provable and trackable, so we are being affected. To what degree that happens, that is highly debatable. Now, there are cycles. That is an indisputable thing. But whether those will occur according to some planetary movement through a constellation, that is going to be a hard sell for me. Most of what has been described in here I disagree with, but I feel like I have explained why I disagree with it as we went along fairly enough that I don't have to expound upon it too much here. So, if you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a sub, throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that I said. Drop it in the comments, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see discussed in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or even the membership. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.